Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Danuta Yatetsky, Dean of Libraries, and I want to thank you for joining us today for the last of our introductory webinars covering the basics of Altmetrics and the tools and data the Altmetric Explorer offers. So we're grateful to our partners at Altmetric for highlighting the tool's features and possible applications to our administrative and academic work. Gathering reliable data on the broader engagement and reach of our research can be challenging and time-consuming. Altmetric Explorer is one of the tools we are examining to help address this problem. Over the next few months, we will be deciding whether to integrate it into the Drexel Research Portal we have created. We look forward to hearing your reactions to the analytic tools and data that Altmetric offers. But before we get started, I want to run through a few housekeeping items. First, please stay muted during the session. We will save time for questions and comments at the end. And second, we're recording this session, and you'll receive a link to the video later this week so you can revisit the webinar at your convenience. So with that, let me turn the Zoom controls over to our guest presenter, Patty Smith, who's a product specialist for Altmetrics. Thank you again for joining us, Patty, a second time because you were on our first one, and I turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. Happy to be here. As Danuta said, my name is Patty Smith. I'm a product specialist at Digital Science. But actually, before joining Digital Science, I worked as a research impact librarian at Northwestern University. And in that role, I actually worked quite closely with a lot of individual faculty members and researchers in helping them find different metrics to maybe enhance different grant applications or, using their promotion and tenure dossier, things like that. So both citation-based metrics and also alt metrics as well. So I actually do have quite a bit of kind of real life experience in working with individual faculty members using alt metrics. So hopefully I'll give you a nice teaser today of alt metric data and maybe how you could use it in your day-to-day work. So with that, I'm probably going to stop my video before I keep going on because I don't want my face to inadvertently block anything I'm showing in the recording. So I'll stop my video and then let's hop into it. I'll show you a couple slides giving you a little bit of an introduction to the basics of Altmetric, but then I'm going to hop into a live demo and show you how you might want to use the platform, might want to use the data to search for your research outputs. So what are altmetrics? So I like to describe altmetrics as we're capturing how people are sharing and talking about research online. Sometimes you may hear them referred to as alternative metrics, but throughout the presentation, I'll be referring to these as altmetrics. And so where does this idea of altmetrics actually come from? I always kind of like to go back to the beginning of where altmetrics came from, because I think it's important to the story. So it was in the early 2010s that there was this call to action in the academic community itself to start tracking interactions with research publications beyond just citations and beyond how academics are citing each other. Because of course, research is impacting and affecting many, many different people, but most of those people and stakeholders are not publishing research or doing research themselves. And so their interactions with research are not captured with those traditional citations. So Altmetric was founded to uncover who these people are, where they're discussing research online beyond just that academic citation bubble. So now we can see, how members of the public are interacting with research on social media, how news outlets are communicating research findings with the public. We can see how policymakers are using research in new guidelines, or how maybe clinical practitioners are sharing research with patients on their clinic Facebook pages, for example. And the really great thing about this is that we can see it happening in near real time. So the time factor is another plus about altmetrics. Whereas if you're using maybe traditional citation-based metrics to try and communicate the influence of your research, citations can be kind of slow. I'm sure you're familiar with that. It can take 2 to 5 years for citations to really start to accrue based on the discipline that you're in. And even some citation-based metrics that are normalized, you can't even calculate them until 2 years have passed. So it can take quite a long time. Whereas altmetrics offer you some immediate feedback about how people may be interacting with your research online. So maybe in your promotion and tenure dossier or in some sort of grants application, maybe you have some recent research that you'd really like to highlight, but it doesn't really have any citations yet. So maybe you could use altmetrics as some sort of fodder, some sort of evidence to demonstrate that your research is having broader influence, maybe in social media, or it's being cited on Wikipedia, or it's being mentioned in the news, for example. I'll talk a little bit about where we're looking for mentions of research online here, because of course that's a question that people ask. So at Altmetric, we do not track the entire internet. That is, we're not looking everywhere for mentions of research online, but we do have a set of sources that we're tracking that fall into these different categories or colorful buckets. So all of the colors that you see on the screen are integrated into each individual research publication or research output's Altmetric donut badge. That's that circular visualization that you see on the screen. So the colors of the donut badge actually do mean something. They tell you at a glance information about where that research is being mentioned online. But if colors are not your thing, if you have a hard time seeing the different colors, that's okay. We do have, if you hover over different parts of the platform, you'll see those breakdowns if colors are not friendly to you. But some of these sources that where we're looking for mentions are kind of obvious. Some are kind of standalone, self-explanatory sources like X, or formerly known as Twitter, Facebook, Wikipedia. Those are self-explanatory. But some of these are groups of sources like policy documents, news, and blogs. But to kind of give you an idea of the volume of sources in each of these categories, we're tracking about 500 policy sources, over 8,000 news sources, over 10,000 blogs, close to 300,000 public-facing Facebook pages, 34 Wikipedia languages. The list goes on. So it's quite a high volume that fall into these different categories. People also often ask about the Altmetric attention score that lives within the center of that donut badge. The score is really meant to be an indicator of the volume of attention that an output has received. So we're attempting to reflect the potential influence and dissemination of a research output. So kind of the dissemination of where it's being mentioned online, perhaps by kind of giving you an idea of the breadth of the audience. It is not a raw count of mentions. It is a weighted score. So something, for example, mentioned in a news outlet is going to receive more weight towards the score than a mention on a Facebook post. But my main takeaway about the score is that the score actually doesn't really matter when it comes to trying to ascertain potential impact or actually tell a story about how your research is perhaps impacting greater audiences. So we really want to look at the context, see what people are saying, see what outlets are discussing the research, and we don't want to rely on the numbers to tell the whole story. So for example, you could have a really high scoring publication, but perhaps it's getting attention for not so great reasons. So my favorite example is the infamous Andrew Wakefield paper linking vaccines and autism. So it's a very highly cited publication. It has a really high Altmetric attention score, but we all know, it's a retracted paper. It's not getting attention for, necessarily positive reasons. Whereas on the flip side, sometimes quote unquote lower scoring publications may have really, really interesting stories to tell. And we'll see an example of that as I jump into the live demo. But here's an example of perhaps a summary of your research impact that you could write out using alternative metrics. Now, I know research impact, how do we define that? That's a whole different topic we could delve into a lot deeper. But when I'm talking about research impact, I'm thinking kind of about the broader influence that research may be having beyond academia. So I just put together this example. This is all real data from an individual researcher's publications. And I'll hop into a live demo and show you exactly how I got all of these numbers and how I put this summary together. It's actually very, very easy to do. So summary of impact for an individual researcher, I could say 41 of my publications have received attention tracked by Altmetric, totaling 1,197 mentions online. My work has been mentioned in 417 news stories in 33 countries, including Who stories in the Washington Post, Smithsonian Magazine, and Scientific American. And my work has influenced 3 total policy documents from World Health Organization, European Food Safety Authority, and Washington State Department of Ecology. So let me hop into a live demo and we'll cover how you can kind of pull some of this information for yourself. All right, so this is what Altmetric Explorer looks like. So once you log in, you'll be on this highlights tab and you'll be viewing the full Altmetric database. So first thing you're probably going to want to do is narrow down your search results a little bit. So I'll show you how you can do that. So I'm going to go up to my edit search button. And you'll see that the default is looking at full Altmetric database. But you'll also see that we have this little tick box of my institution only. So Drexel and the library, they have created your own custom data integration where you can actually just view research just from Drexel. So tick this little my institution only box, run search, And now we're going to be looking at a much more specific result set here. So just looking at outputs from Drexel University, and there's lots of different tabs here where you could dive deeper into these research outputs, into these publications to see the attention that they're getting. But of course, this is a session focused on the individual researcher, right? So how can you look up your own publications? Well, there are a couple different ways you can do that. So I'll show you how to do that now. So first, I'm going to click over on this My Institution, little kind of Parthenon icon here. And so there is this big, long alphabetical list of all of faculty and researchers' names here. You can also view this breakdown by department level as well. So perhaps you want to look at your entire department, not just at yourself. So you could come into this section and see those different departmental breakdowns. So that's one way you could craft your search. But if I go back to, oh no, hopefully this doesn't last long. There's some maintenance work going on with Altmetric right now, and it looks like that's interfering with the platform. Uh-oh. Hold on. Let me stop sharing for a second. Hopefully we can get back online here. Okay, it's back. There we go. Hopefully that doesn't happen again. Sorry about that. All right. Another way you could search for yourself is by going into the advanced search up here at the top of the screen. So I'm going to go back into my advanced search, and you'll see over on the left-hand side, we have this My Institution view. And so this is where you could actually just search for yourself by name. So you could start typing in your first name, start typing in your last name, find yourself on the list, and then you can run your search accordingly. And now you'll just be looking at research publications, research outputs associated with you as an individual. So that's one way to narrow your search. Another way you could do this is if you just wanted to look at maybe a handful of your publications or a specific set, you can also use this Add Scholarly Identifiers section here. So I'm actually going to use this one. Because we're kind of using an anonymous person here. I didn't want to call out anyone specifically without their permission. So I'm going to paste in this researcher's DOIs associated with their publications, and I'm going to click Save. And so this is their entire research portfolio, but you could do this with just a couple publications if you just want to take a look at those. And I'm going to run my search. All right, and so now thinking back to those slides that I showed and kind of some of those impact summary statements, how can I start forming those looking at Altmetric Explorer? So my first statement was 41 of my publications have received attention tracked by Altmetric, totaling 1,197 mentions online. So you can get that just here from this highlights tab. So 41 of this researcher's outputs have received attention tracked by Altmetric, and then I can see the total number of mentions over here on the right. I can also take a look at this attention breakdown, and this is again going to give me some high-level summary numbers of where online this attention is occurring. So quite a lot of this is coming from social media, in particular X, which that's quite common. A lot of times that's going to be your biggest number because just so much is happening with sharing research on X as a social media platform. But I also can hover over this red, and that's where I see 417 news mentions. So that kind of goes back to my statement of my work has been mentioned in 417 news stories in 33 countries. I can also see Wikipedia mentions, videos, so that's YouTube. I can see 3 policy documents and 1 patent mention as well. But where did I get in that statement? So I had said 417 news stories in 33 countries. How do I know what's been mentioned in 33 countries? So I can come on over to the demographics tab, where we're going to break it down by country for X, Facebook, news, and policy. So if I toggle over to that news tab, so here I have this nice statement up here at the top. So there have been 717 news stories about my work in 283 unique news outlets in 33 different countries. If you want the whole list of countries here, you can actually export this information, where you'll get that full breakdown in a table exported to a CSV file. This map here is a little bit interactive. If you want to hover over a particular country and see how many mentions are occurring in that country, you can do that as well. And it is clickable. So if I wanted to see like those 10 stories from outlets in Canada, for example, I could click on Canada, and then I'd be redirected so I can explore all of those mentions in detail there. So that's where I got to that country information, the demographics tab. I always look out for these kind of summary statements because you can just take those and adapt them and use them in your own summary of how your work is being shared widely. But then I kind of took it even a step further, right? In those slides, I said, it's been mentioned in 2 stories from the Washington Post, Smithsonian, and Scientific American. So how did I know that those my work has been mentioned in those sources in particular. So in that case, I can hop on over to this mentioned sources tab, and this is going to show you cumulatively where your work has been mentioned in different news outlets, by different blogs, by different individual posters on X. So you can see this person here has mentioned this work 6 times, and you can see the total number of followers they have as well. But again, up at the top, we have a little bit of filtering that can happen. So if I limit this to news, now I can see, so my work has been mentioned in Health Medicine Net 10 times. And so this is where you can do a little bit of cherry picking. So you can, which of these news outlets speak to you the most, or are you the most interested in? And so this is where I kind of scrolled through this list. Or I know it's towards the bottom. So I scrolled through this list and I found, oh, cool, Washington Post. That's like a major news outlet. They have mentioned my work 2 times. And then I also, scrolling through these pages, found 2 mentions by Smithsonian Magazine and Scientific American as well. If you don't want to do lots of scrolling through this, again, you can export this list as a CSV file and you get it in a nice condensed table for you there. Then also I could use this view to limit by policy. I had 3 policy mentions. And now I get that nice list there of exactly where those policy mentions are actually occurring. Another tab that I find to be quite useful is this research outputs tab. This is going to show you all of your individual publications kind of one by one and their corresponding altmetric attention score. So this person has a couple publications that are very, very high scoring. They got a lot of attention, but you'll notice that, they don't have, like, most of their publications don't have a ton of attention, right? So that's very typical. Maybe you have 1 or 2 publications that have, kind of higher scores and they've received lots of attention. But most often you're going to find that a lot of your publications actually don't have super high scores. But again, that doesn't tell the whole story, right? So for example, this publication here, it's purple. I know that means policy. So this publication in particular has actually been mentioned in a policy document. That's usually really important to people. So I can go open that details page, so metric details page, and I can see those 2 policy documents where this has been mentioned. And if I click these links, it's going to take me out to those websites where I can view the full text PDF of those publications, or of those policy documents, excuse me. But this is actually an individual person that I helped them kind of scour Altmetric and look at citation-based metrics as well to find an interesting story that they could add to their grant application. And so I came across this publication in particular here. So I find news attention to be very interesting in addition to policy and patents as well. So this publication, if I open this one, so this is what I would kind of do. I'd kind of go through the publications that had news attention, and I would take a look at it. I'd see specifically kind of what kind of attention it received. If I go over to news here, I found this news story, which is quite interesting, where this person is an oncofertility researcher. So they're looking to preserve fertility options for cancer patients. But it turns out that trans people are using their research as well, and looking to cancer research for fertility options. So I found that to be a very, very interesting story about the broad applications of their research. And again, this is clickable. This will take me directly to that news story where I can see the text. I can see exactly what they're saying about my research within that original news story. But within this research outputs tab, you can sort this list in lots of ways. So if I wanted to sort by news stories, for example, well, kind of not much changes here in this case, but I can see this publication has 269 news mentions, 118. So it's in descending order then by total number of news mentions, or if I wanted to sort by policy, you could do that as well. And then the list will change a little bit. But another thing that you might want to do is maybe you want to set up some alerts for yourself about your research publications. So let's start with a clean slate here. And I'm just going to go back and I'm going to search for an individual author again. So maybe I'm this person. I'm going to search for myself, run my search, and then I'm going to save it. So over on the right-hand side, I'm going to save this search. I can revisit my saved searches over here on the left-hand side. And your most recently saved search will pop up towards the top of this list here. I'm going to rename this. I'm going to click this green pencil and I'm going to call it, my research, and click save. So if every time I log into Altmetric Explorer, maybe I only want to see my stuff. I only want to see my research. You can actually set any of your saved searches as your default home screen. So if I click that tick box every time I log in, I'm only going to see my research. Or you could also elect to receive some regular updates about when your research is mentioned. So maybe you want to click this little tick box and receive a monthly email. So it's going to give you a summary of, there have been 10 X posts mentioning your research and one news story mentioned your research. It's going to give you a nice monthly roundup of where your research has been mentioned. If you want to see what one of those looks like, you can actually send yourself click this little paper airplane icon and it'll send an example to you. And we also have this shareable report. So this is kind of nice. It's going to just provide a nice summary of where your research has been mentioned. So we're going to see those high level summary numbers, total mentions, I see this attention source breakdown of where those mentions are coming from online, so which sources those are occurring in. We have this attention over time. So the default is showing all time, but we can edit that a little bit if we want to. And then it's going to show you the top 5 research outputs as well. But I can edit this. So let me click Edit Report up at the top. So anything you don't want in here, you can X out of. Maybe I want to edit this attention. Anything with a pencil you can edit. I want to edit this attention over time. So instead of viewing maybe total mentions from all time, maybe I want to view news mentions from the current calendar year. Click Done. So that's a more recent reflection of my research. But you can play around with that. You can add in additional timeline charts by clicking Add Attention Chart over on the left. And then maybe I want to view my top 10 research outputs. So again, I can click Edit. Let's view 10 at a time. Click Done. Now I got a top 10 list, and maybe I want to share this with someone. Maybe I want to make this public. So I'm going to click Make Public and Save Changes. Now it's not public in that anyone can find this. It's public in that I can share it with anyone and they can view it. So now I have this Share Report button where I have this dynamic URL. So I could post this on social media. I could just, save this URL for my own reference. I can share it with my boss. I don't know, do whatever you want with it. Whoever has access to that URL will be able to view a live version of this report. So it will keep updating as new mentions keep occurring. And I think so that's it for the live demo. Hopefully that gives you some examples of how you can start using Altmetric Explorer. But I did want to show one other example of looking at this researcher's quote unquote research impact, and another way that you could potentially talk or use altmetrics in some sort of maybe summary statement. So we have these bulleted lists, this bulleted list where I went over how to do that. But then also maybe I want to focus in on one particular mention, where I want to talk about it in kind of a more narrative format. So in this case, I used that PBS NewsHour article, and I came up with a little bit of a statement about the broad impact of my research. So I could say our work has been cited widely in the news and on social media, evidencing the dissemination of our work to broad audiences. One story in particular showcases the breadth and broad applicability of our work. This publication was cited in a PBS NewsHour story about how trans people are looking to oncology research for fertility options. So just an example of how you could include altmetrics in some sort of narrative statement. And you'll actually notice that in this little paragraph here, I actually don't use any numbers at all. Well, I guess I say one story in particular, but other than that, I don't use any numbers to communicate that broader impact and influence that my research is having. But of course, you could use numbers if you want, and use this sort of format as well. We did the live demo, and with that, I think we're done. We have 5 minutes for questions, so happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thanks so much, Patty. If anybody has questions, you're welcome to either type them in chat and we can read them out loud to everyone, or just unmute. It's a fairly small group, so I think that would work fine.
Hi, this is really super interesting. Thank you. I wondered if there's any thinking about some of, as Twitter is going through whatever process it's going through, I wondered if there were any thoughts about incorporating other replacements, alternatives, et cetera, like Blue Sky, et cetera, for Twitter.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a couple sides to answering that question. First, I'll answer the question of kind of what's going on with research communication on Twitter. So we are keeping a close eye on that, and actually it's maintained, it's been fairly stable with all of the volatility kind of happening with the platform. The level of research communication that we're seeing actually hasn't really gone down. There are some dips when things happen, but then it goes back up. And so we've seen a pretty consistent, since the pandemic started, there was a massive spike in how people were sharing research on X. And it's been very consistent over the last few years. But with that said, there are other platforms that some people are preferring to use now. So like Blue Sky, definitely on our radar, keeping an eye on it, but it does not have a way to track attention on it yet. Hopefully it will, but technically it's not possible at this point in time. But I'm guessing it'll get there. Other ones like Mastodon is another one that people ask about quite a lot. It is technically possible to track Mastodon, but it's not an undertaking that we can take right now because of the way that it's created. Like Twitter is just like Twitter. All of Twitter, we have like one way to track that. It's just like an influx fire hose of data. But with Mastodon, it was designed to kind of be the opposite of that, where there's all these, like there's thousands of little communities. And so we would have to set up individual tracking for every single one of those thousands of communities. And so it's kind of like we're kind of waiting to see what happens, to see if we want to undertake that. Other ones people ask about are like TikTok or Instagram. With those at this point, it's not possible to track because you can include, like in TikTok, like you can include, or in Instagram, I know, you can include links with like within like your video or things like that, but in the description, you cannot include links. And so that's what we need to be able to track the research, like would be in the description of like the picture or video, a link out to the research to be able to like make that mention. I think it's the same for TikTok as well. So they're all on our radar, and we're looking at them, keeping track of them. But right now, most of them, it's not technically possible for us to add the tracking. So. Any other questions? And this was kind of a really quick intro. So if you do have follow-up questions about how maybe you could use Altmetric data, I know the library is happy to answer your questions. I'm happy to answer your questions. So if you want to do a deeper dive into this for yourself or for your greater department or whatever it may be, we can always do follow-up sessions as well.
So Patty, with apologies, I'm going to have to leave shortly, but I have a question that I think a lot of faculty might be wondering about. Do you have any examples of other clients that are using this, where they use this form of evidence of achievement and scholarly activity, or possibly even civic engagement, if it comes to that are used in universities when they're doing review for tenure or for promotion?
I haven't heard of anyone officially incorporating it into like you have to like list alternative metrics or alt metrics associated with your publications. So far in like my experience of like working at Northwestern, it was more of just like here's a way to maybe enhance it to make yours a little bit different, as kind of like a cherry on top of including traditional metrics and alternative metrics. But we do get that question a lot of like, how could we incorporate this? But I don't know like a specific answer of, we know X university has this as a part of like their promotion and tenure process. But I do think it's a nice way to kind of maybe set yourself apart and highlight some of those broader impacts. But to go on to answer that question in a different route, talking about grant applications, I do know that more and more funders are requiring like dissemination plans, and like how are you going to track and prove the impact that your research is having. So like reporting back to funders and including that in your dissemination plan, you could say that, we have this tool, Altmetric Explorer, and that's one way where I can actually track the broader attention and potential impact and influence my research is having. So that is one way that I know you could use Altmetric in those types of more official documents and things like that.
Thanks, that's really helpful.
So I see it's 12:31. If we can, there's one question that was typed in chat. Is Google Scholar an option?
Carolyn, can you expand upon that? What do you mean by is Google Scholar an option, like adding to our tracking? Is that what you mean?
Yes, I was just wondering, is that one of the possibilities. When you go into Altmetrics, it's Google Scholar, one of the options.
No, so we do not track Google Scholar as like a source of attention, because it's not really like you could go on. We're trying to track sources of attention where it's like someone is engaging with this research in some sort of way, whether it's on social media or it's in the news. It's like someone saying, oh, this research was conducted and like, here's what I think about it. Or here's how we're sharing this in this news story. Google Scholar is more of just a place where it's like, I'm going to type in a person's name or a topic, and I'm going to get publications that are about that. So it's not really people like sharing it, I guess, in some sort of platform. It's more just like a discovery tool where you can search for a topic and then get the associated research. So it's not something that I don't think we would ever add as a source of attention online. So hopefully that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Great.
Well,
Thank you again so much, Patty. We really appreciate your time. Again, if anyone has questions, you can send them directly to me. I can make those connections and try to help in any way possible. And we'll be reaching out again with the recording to this, as well as the other sessions we hosted, likely a survey and some other communications over the next couple of weeks and months. So thank you all again for attending. Thanks again, Patty.
great. Thank you. Bye-bye.